Let's start off for the record, your name and title.
Christopher Neff, and for this capacity, I'm, I don't know.
What do you want me to put in the lower left of the screen?
Dr. Christopher Neff, shark bite researcher.
Sure.
How's that?
And Chris, your PhD was different than any other PhD I've heard of. In fact, is it still the only one of its kind?
It's still the only one, yes.
How many years? You recently completed it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How many years did it take to complete this?
It was long. 4 years to do the PhD. I did a master's degree in public policy beforehand that began to sort of just scrape the surface of the issue, and I did that for 2 years, and then did the PhD for 4.
And what was it that caused you to pursue this path?
It was a tough problem. I was interested in addressing, a problem that hadn't been solved, a tough issue that needed attention, and the simple fact is that, like you say, nobody had looked at this, and I thought the politics of shark attacks was an issue that should be addressed and should be analyzed. So when I first got accepted into the program, I sent an email to all the shark scientists in the world that I knew of. I put together a list of about 30 of them and sent them all an email saying, hi, I'm doing this research as a social scientist, not as a marine biologist. Do you have any tips or things you wanted to tell me? And they all said, there's no money. You're on your own. But keep doing it. Good luck with the research. So it was, it was sort of half positive, half challenging. And so for the first year, I had to self-fund my PhD for the first year, which was $30,000, and then sort of keep it going. But it was a significant, amount of time and effort that had to go into just doing this. So I can totally understand why no one had done it before. It was a tall order at the time.
To spend that kind of money to go through those obstacles, you must have believed in an end goal. Is there something specific you want to accomplish?
I wanted to address the rogue shark theory. That was one of the things that I wanted to do. I just could not get over that that there was this, Jaws shark that was still lurking out there, and we were still taking, using a scientific frame to have a conversation about it. So that was the first thing, because to be perfectly honest, there was not a significant increase in shark bites at that time. This is 2009, 2010. Things were sort of bubbling below the surface, but it hadn't erupted. And then you had Egypt and Reunion Island in Western Australia, and it really exploded internationally. The concept of shark control and all the things that I was studying sort of just came up out of nowhere.
The last paper I read of yours was one that was co-authored in 2012, and you and a guy from Moat Marine Lab want to change the terminology associated with shark encounters. And instead of lumping it all in the shark attack, you've got sightings, encounters, bites, and fatal bites. You did not include consumption as a category.
We did not. That's correct.
And was that for a specific reason? Are there so few it's not even worth it, or?
It certainly it happens, but the evidence that it has happened it tends to be sort of difficult because so we didn't include it, which is true. Actually, that's the first time I've heard that question. So it's a reasonable question, but I think the assumption in my brain, if I was going to file that under somewhere, that would be under a fatal bite, because the categories are shark sighting, shark encounter, shark bite, where there's a bite but it's not fatal, and then fatal shark bite. So I would put consumption under fatal shark bite.
And we already talked about Fishhook, and I've been there 3 times. And my understanding is that they've had not only bad luck, but such bad luck that there have been 2 consumptions there. Is that at all tipping towards evidence of a rogue shark?
No, it isn't. I mean, there's 2 cases. There's Lloyd Skinner, and then there's the tragic incident of Tina Webb. And you've got Tina Webb happens in 2004, Lloyd Skinner happens in 2010. So to assume that the same shark, separated by 6 years, in roughly the same area, at the same beach, did something, I think stretches possibility. I know that the facts are that these are 2 consumptions at the same beach, but the fact is also that you can have very large sharks, and they're very big, we're very little. So what may look like a consumption to us is not actually a consumption, or consumption for them. The fact is also that you can have, it's really tragic, but the simple fact is that you usually have searches that go on for numbers of days to provide comfort to the public, and also to make sure the body parts don't wash up on shore. So the fact is that what looks like a full consumption could just be the failure to recover parts, or part of a process that is unfolding. So both of the cases are incredibly tragic, and it's correct that that very little was found. But I don't think that those 2 points mean that there's evidence of rogue sharks.
As few consumptions as there are worldwide, it does make me kind of not want to swim there.
It's a sharky beach. I mean, when I went there, I went to Fishhook when I was doing my research, and I was standing at Fishhook, and the shark alarm went off, and I saw Munwa BC was there, and I said, Munwa, I know how far out. I know this system. How far out is the shark? And he radioed, and he said, it's 10 meters in front of you. And I couldn't see it. I'm just standing on the beach on on a sunny day. I couldn't see the shark, and there was a 3-meter shark 10 meters out. And the simple fact is that False Bay is a biodiversity hotspot. There aren't biodiversity hotspots everywhere in the world. That particular area, that False Bay, is extraordinary for the marine life that it has, and whether it's whales, seals, or sharks, and they all use it, and they use it a lot, and they use it for different reasons. So that's a high-trafficked area for marine life, and I think you've got to know that when you go to that beach.
I felt in reading your papers that you anticipated a change for the better in the future. Did this Western Australia coal surprise you?
No, it didn't, unfortunately. When I started my research, when I did my master's degree, I looked at WA's policy, which started with the Ken Crew incident in 2000. And there they had done their first catch and kill order. And this was followed by the belief that there had been a rogue shark in WA later in 2003. There was Ken Crew has a fatality in very shallow water in 2000. They issue a catch and kill order to kill the shark. There are a couple kayakers who were hurt. No one's injured. Who were essentially harassed by a shark, or seemed to feel harassed. And then the now Premier, Colin Barnett, goes to the State House floor, and it's in the parliamentary record, says, Cottesloe Beach, it's his electorate, and he says, I think this is the same shark that's come back. It's harassing these people in 2003, the Ken Crew incident was tragic and terrible, and this could be the same shark that's coming back and harassing us. And so what we need to do is we need to have a policy that preemptively kills these sharks. And so in many ways, the catch and kill policy, the imminent threat policy, are all predicated on the belief that rogue sharks, that Jaws sharks exist, and that sharks are not fish, they are movie monsters. And you need to have government policies that treat them like movie monsters. And I had done that research in 2006 and 2007. And so when 2010, 2011, I will say this, I was disappointed that it got as bad as it did. I was invited by the WA Department of Fisheries to do a presentation for them. And I flew across the country and did a presentation for a room full of surf lifesavers, fisheries people, some political people, and said to them, this is a very tricky situation. You've now had a series of, this is before George Wainwright was taken, and you've had a series of terrible incidents. I said the next one is going to be the trigger. So we've got to assume that there's going to be another one, and try to figure out what the judgment is. I said, because what you're going to have is just sharks that hang out are going to be called nuisance sharks that people try to get rid of. And so we need to have a conversation about this, and you need to sort out how you want to handle it. Somewhere following that conversation, I think I was labeled an instigator or a problem academic. And I was a nuisance academic, and their policy went off in a different direction. There had been a time when the way WA was handling it was more public education, more funding, more science. That changes, and they did a fundamental change to the way that they were looking at it, and now the problem was the fish. And this is a problem fish, and this is a monster movie shark, and we're going to attack that. And unfortunately, that's what they've stuck with.
So dating back a few years before this, Cole, they'd already been leaning towards some sort of mitigation.
They've been doing all of this since 2000. The only difference is that they didn't kill a shark. The rhetoric has been there, the policy has been there, but the shark wasn't. They've tried to catch the shark in numerous instances and never have. They still haven't killed a great white shark.
Mm-hmm.
In any of the things that they've done since 2000. They've been trying to kill great white sharks for 14 years, and they haven't killed a great white shark. So, and that's an important detail, because when you look at other programs that kill lots of great white sharks, but it might be below the surface, right? It might be shark nets, or it might be something else, and they're just quiet about it. They tend to skirt the issue by being quiet. WA is copping a lot of flack in this case, even though they haven't killed any great whites, because the discourse that they're using, the rhetoric and the narrative that they're using is calculated to make sharks the enemy. And I think that that's detrimental, and I think it takes us off a focus on beach safety.
There's a danger of, well, I wonder who is the bigger enemy, the government or the media, or is it a combination of them? Because the media wouldn't have as much if it wasn't for what the government was doing.
I say at the end of one of my articles, that shark bites are sort of a lose-lose problem. They get a lot of attention, which is exactly the problem for the purposes of this conversation. To have reasonable beach safety discussions, you want to have a level-headed conversation, and the attraction to talking about shark attacks and the words that are used. So shark attack as a phrase is perceptually contemporaneous. So if I said to you that my cousin was the victim of a home invasion, right? We've got a picture in our heads of what we're dealing with here. Someone's tied to a chair in the basement of the house, right? Not somebody took the DVD. Shark attack is very similar in the way that it presents a picture from Jaws or from whatever it does of the outcome from the event. So I've been eaten by a great white shark. But it doesn't match up to reality. And so you end up with a problem when the phrases that you use and these things are used across different lines. So when scientists, for instance, use shark attack, and then newspaper people or on newscasts use the phrase shark attack, again, it's presenting this picture of an outcome that may have no relationship to what actually happened. And so media use it because it's got extra hype, it's got extra juice in the phrase. And that's one of the reasons why we've pushed back so hard on the use of shark attack language, is because it tells a story that isn't true in many cases.
For what purpose?
For the purposes of proper public education.
No. Why do they use the wrong terms?
They use it because it's a why do who? The media or scientists?
Media.
Media use it because it's a juicy phrase. When you say shark attack, you're going to get more money. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to get better viewers. You're going to get more attention. If you run a headline with shark attack on it in the newspaper or across the banner of a newscast, shark attack, news at 6, that's going to get people to tune in. And it has created an industry where in a competitive market where people are looking for viewers, you can get viewers with sharks. Shark attacks sell.
So having said that, what hope do you have that the media would ever get rid of this $ title and adopt your other terms, sightings, encounters, etc.?
I always have total hope. I assume these things are going to happen. In fact, as soon as we did put out the study, and it got 2,000 hits in the first 2 days, the Australian shark attack file changed its ratings on the basis of the report. And then the American Elasmobranch Society changed its policy and made a recommendation to the Associated Press. So we had the largest shark scientific group in the world and the Australian shark attack file both adopted it in 2013. So I actually have great hope, because the simple fact is that shark attack is not, it doesn't make anybody any safer. Saying the word, scaring people, doesn't make them any safer. And knowing how many sightings there are, knowing how many encounters there are. When we did our study, we saw that 40% of reported shark attacks in the state of New South Wales over a 30-year period had no injury whatsoever. It was misreporting it to the public. And we were able to reclassify those in a way that actually helps people. So my point is that the end is that we win because these 4 categories help people manage risk and manage their behavior and know better. So there's a 30% increase in encounters between kayaks and surf skis and surfboards with sharks in New South Wales, which hadn't been reported. So we didn't know it. But now that we did the new classification, you're able to manage risk based on the user groups. And you can say, okay, different users are having different levels of risk, and we can begin to approach it better. So I think you get I think people are interested in survival. They're interested in, and that's one of the reasons why shark attack is such a potent phrase, is because it begins to trigger survival value. If I understand what's going on here, there's survival value in me tuning into this program about shark attacks tonight, because maybe I'm going to learn something that's going to help me if I go in the water. There's also value in the classifications we did, that it provides the same amount of survival value, that if I can understand the differences between these things and diagnose when there's a lot of sightings, when there are a lot of encounters, or when there are a lot of bites, that's going to help me too.
So let me try to summarize that. Misinformation going out right now is creating a world of fear, because you hear the word attack way too many times, even when it's not an attack. And if proper terms were going out there, then people would be informed of, look how many sightings there haven't been attacks. And eventually they'd come to realize that shark presence does not equal shark threat.
Exactly.
Another term that's been bothering me besides attack is stalking. And this has been attributed to sharks passing a beach. Mm-hmm. It is stalking a beach. Or sharks that come and look at a boat. They are stalking the boat, mm-hmm. as though they hope to knock someone out of the boat or such. If you're successful with shark attack, are you going to go after that term next?
We mention it in the article around cruising. It's in the there's a little section, because it's around the criminalization of shark bites, that you use words like, at one point there's someone, David Webster uses the phrase, it's not manipulate, it's molest. That the person was molested by a shark, essentially. So you end up with, so whether it's harassed, stalked, cruising, marauding around, you've got these key words that are used that attempt to criminalize the behavior of swimming. And I absolutely agree that that's a key issue, because it turns, again, shark behavior, a fish swimming in the water, into predatory, but even different than that, criminal behavior and this isn't a shark, this is a monster.
Unfortunately, most people don't spend the time or effort that someone such as yourself does to find out the truth. And that's why Mr. Barnett and the media putting out inaccurate information scares me. Because when I was just taking a poll, going around interviewing random people, they didn't actually even understand what the coal was, but they understood that there was a problem and something had to be done, and Mr. Barnett was making them safer, much like Mr. Bush protected us from Iraqis. How can we ever hold government officials responsible for spreading misinformation?
It's a good question. The first thing that you've got to do is really to recognize the nature of these events. They are these highly emotional events, create opportunities for politicians, and holding them accountable for the actions they take is really something that needs to happen sort of across the board. So other elites need to call them out, because the public, when you have a scary incident, the public aren't experts. They're not marine biologists. And they're being faced with a difficult situation. And they're being asked now, they're looking for direction and they're looking for help. And I don't blame them. What they're not getting is any help from another credible source. And so you need scientists to step up and provide real information. I mean, I would say that it's important for the public to know that shark control is a sham. It is not real science. It is not real beach safety. It is political theater that is used to advance political interests following human tragedy. And unfortunately, this is something that continues to make its way in and be exploited, like the case of Western Australia. This is not a reasonable conversation they're having. They're talking about killing endangered species to build public confidence. And unfortunately, that has taken hold.
In this day and age, when a government such as Western Australia is what I would call taking steps backwards and spreading...
If you need to shut that door, you can shut that
door.
Oh,
I didn't even realize it was open.
Sorry.
That's awesome. I'm a little bit worried that if our scientists or other people aren't re-educating people well enough, that misinformation from the Australian government, Western Australian government, could actually influence the governments of other countries.
The worry that what happens in Western Australia could influence other countries is completely true. I mean, I was hired by the Reunionese government to fly out to Reunion Island. And when I got there, all of the surfers said to me, they hunt and kill sharks in Western Australia. Why don't we do that here? And it came up time and time again that Western Australia is doing it. Australia has shark nets. Why don't we have shark nets? Western Australia has shark hunts. Why don't we have shark hunts? Queensland has drum lines. Why don't we have drum lines? And Australia is seen as the model for beach safety. It's the sunburnt country. It's the perfect surf lifesaver. Taking on the waves. And the simple fact is that reputation translates into shark control and translates into perceptions of how to respond to shark bites. And that ends up being a problem when the policies that they choose are barbaric, behind the times, or simply misinformed, which is what the current environment that we're in. And so when people are modeling bad behavior to expand it, we end up with a problem. Recife is looking at drum lines. They've also used shark nets there previously. We see an expansion of shark nets around the world, of additional locations who are picking them up and using these culling methods. So almost all of it is based on the models off of Australia. South Africa's nets and their drum lines in Durban are based on the Queensland nets. Queensland put its nets in 1957. Natal put its nets in 1962. Pardon me. Can I redo that?
Yeah.
That's not entirely accurate. The Queensland nets and drum lines were used as the basis for the Natal nets and drum lines. So the two of those programs are intimately related, even though the nets in Durban are much longer than they are in Queensland. So the gear isn't identical, but the methods and using a mixed gear approach is the same.
Is there any reason for concern that this changing of policy will make its way all the way over to the United States, where we haven't had shark mitigation policies to date?
I honestly don't think so. In the U.S., the biggest policy there is swim at your own risk, and that's a liability policy that's been put in place regarding, heavy surf, jet ski. If you get hit by a jet ski, struck by lightning, or bitten by a shark, it all falls into the same category. And the fact is that for our purposes, they're treating them all as accidents and not giving special agency or power to, the monster shark story. And that is actually really valuable here. So the fact is that there's a strong liability history and litigious nature to American beach going that is pretty solid, and I wouldn't expect to see them do that. But I would note, just quickly, that that hasn't always been the case. Both, you had shark control in Hawaii, obviously, for almost 20 years, and you've had shark hunts in Hawaii, and you've also had the first fisheries data that ever came in the North Atlantic, came in because fisheries was asked to lay long lines off the coast of New Jersey because of fear of sharks. So, and that's really where fisheries data about sharks started to come from.
So is this presented as though they're actually trying to do it for science, but in reality?
No, it was they were trying to do it, and then they realized in doing it that it could be used for fisheries, but it was done specifically just to kill sharks because they were afraid of a shark bite near a beach.
So the first long lining,
yes,
instilled by the fisheries department that scientists now use data from, was for shark mitigation.
That's correct. I mean, Sydney used to hire Japanese shark finners. Shark finning used to be a method of beach safety, and they did that in the 60s.
Is that a way to make money off of it at the same time?
It's a good way to get the fishermen interested. You can kill the shark. It's a win-win. You kill the shark, fin them, keep the fins, and we're all safer for it. That was the theory.
What if the United States had the fatality rate that Australia does? Think things might change?
I think, I hope not.
I don't really think of the United States as a take responsibility for yourself place anymore. It's pretty much sue everyone else, and it's everyone else's responsibility to make a good decision for you.
It's tricky. I went to Cape Cod, which is probably the place that's the most likely. If there's any location that's going to have a fatality, it's probably going to be Cape Cod. So I went to Cape Cod and I approached National Park Service and had a good meeting with them and other stakeholders. And because they don't have a shark problem in Cape Cod, they have a seal problem. They have seals that don't have an island. They're beach seals. So they've got 30,000 new beach seals that swim through the surf. So they're swimming by people. I asked how often the seals swim through the swim area, and they said every 10 minutes. So if you go in the water around Cape Cod in the summertime, you're swimming near seals. They've taken over the entirety of the arm. And And so that's probably the most likely place that you would end up having something happen. And the simple fact is I, having had that conversation with them a year after they had a shark bite where someone was bitten, I think they are able to separate the movie myths from the reality of sharks. And if there was a tragedy, I think that there would be real resistance to a shark hunt. And because I think that's probably the most likely scenario that we would see in an American context.
It's interesting that you say Cape Cod is the most likely, even though California has had an unfortunate number of attacks recently.
When California, they've got the one beach, the Air Force Beach, Vandenberg Air Force Beach, that has had 2 fatalities at the same beach, and within a short period of time, just within about a year. But again, that beach in particular is not a recreational beach per se. It's more isolated, and so if you go out into that in that context, there are lots of risks that you take in when you go out there. You really are in someone else's domain. I think the difference with a Florida or with a Cape Cod is that we're talking about recreational beaches, tourist beaches with tourist dollars, and the question is whether or not there's pressure to maintain tourism. The Vandenberg Air Force Base is not a tourist beach, and I think that plays a huge role in the way in which it's viewed.
Well, that's interesting because tourism is used as an excuse by Western Australia for implementing the drumlines. In fact, Mr. Hunt's letter says national interest, economics of tourism. Yet not initiating shark mitigation is also used to promote tourism in Florida. Who's wrong there?
It's all political theater. We're talking about people who are suggesting a policy that cannot work. This is about addressing the perception of risk. It's not about actual risk reduction. So if they believe that doing drum lines is going to lower the perception of risk, then they're going to do it. And that risk is not the risk that someone has of going into the water. It's the risk that they have as a politician that they might not be reelected. And the risk that we're talking here about political survival. We're not talking about beach safety. And so if I face a risk in terms of being blamed for a shark bite or something, then I'm going to say, well, look, we've tried everything we could. We put in the drum lines, we catched and killed the sharks, and killing sharks is good politics. So you end up having these positions that are taken that are devoid of reality and devoid of safety. These are simply not shark bite prevention methods. This is about political risk mitigation, not shark mitigation.
The politicians are providing a placebo effect of safety at the cost of sharks' lives?
I think it's worse than that. Placebo effect doesn't kill you or cause you harm. These measures actively cause the public harm because when you lie to someone as a basis of your policy and that lie is allowed to fester, it undermines the democratic system, it undermines public education, it undermines public trust, and we are dealing with a set of policies and a set of narratives that simply have no basis in reality.
Whose responsibility is it to stand up and say, the government is wrong, stop misinforming people?
The hope would be that you don't need to tell the government that what it's doing is wrong. But the simple fact is that sometimes you do need to stand up to the government. And I think the failure of reporters to be more critical, I think the failure of scientists to be more assertive on what is clearly false science, and the failure of opposition movements within politics to combat against parties in power is a problem. You have opposition parties that are also afraid to say that they're wrong because they don't want to be blamed either. And so shark bites may not be governable, but they are blamable. And so you see a lot of activity that happens on the basis of that.
So, yeah, a lot of things kill people, but we don't have control over a lot of those. you're not able to blame something and go after it. Is that a lot of what sharks have going against them?
Well, that's it. Once you change it from a fish to a movie monster, and you give it this special powers, you make it blamable. If a fish swam by and hit the boat, well, that's Mother Nature. If a shark swam by and careened and stalked your boat, then we're really talking about blaming a creature, and we can punish it. So it moves it into a different category where government now can act, and where I can tell a story about how government needs to act.
What about people who are of the mindset of, who cares? It's a shark. What's wrong with you hippie people? What's wrong with killing them?
I think I generally leave it to scientists to talk about, marine biodiversity. To those people, I generally have two things to say. The first is that I'm interested in beach safety. And if I know that killing sharks isn't going to make you any safer, and instead it's going to give you a false sense of security that probably increases your risk, then you should care. And the second is that my scientist friends and marine biologists will talk about trophic cascades and the impact that you can have. So you saw this in South Africa, where they fished out a lot of the white sharks, and there was an increase in dusky sharks. And there was just a very serious shark bite from a dusky shark a couple of years ago. And dusky sharks' jaws are stronger than white sharks. So, if you want to have a conversation about really lowering risk, you've got to look at all these issues.
Are scientists independent from the government?
I think scientists do a good job. I think scientists are in a very tricky, I gotta stop smiling. I think they're in a tricky position. Are they independent of the government? I think.
Is there anything to stop? Well, indeed. Is there anything standing in the way of scientists saying what needs to be said?
I think scientists generally do a heroic job. They're asked, to look at a lot of different species, handle a lot of different portfolios, and give a public service. There is a special relationship that any of us who work within research hold. It's evidence-based research. Any comments we give, any comment I give to you, any comment that a scientist gives, needs to be able to stand up to a different level of rigor than you would write in a blog post or do something else. And so within that additional responsibility, there is a role for scientists to speak truth to power. And I think that it can be difficult. In countries that have a lot of state funding that goes into it, just like you would at any place. If the state funding goes into your research, then it can create a pressure and a tension there that needs to be resolved, and each scientist or researcher needs to deal with that on a case-by-case basis. They need to deal with it one person at a time and see what they themselves want to say or not say about an issue.
Can education make us safer?
Yes, education can make us safer.
How?
If you knew that, if you're able to view, this is the issue. Education can make us safer because one of the biggest problems that isn't being addressed in shark bite prevention is the role of the beach and the conception of the beach. We think of the beach as this recreational spot, when really it's just the wild. And so we're essentially in the Masai Mara, walking through, and there are sharks. If we were in the Masai Mara, it would be lions, and we just walk through during lunchtime, not realizing what's going on. If you reconceptualize the beach and look at it in terms of the dynamic ecosystem that it is, with whales coming through and dolphins and bait fish and a million other things, and look at all those factors, then you're able to judge your risk better. You're able to understand better what's going on in those environments, and you're able to really detach yourself from the blame that often is attributed to sharks in these situations. The simple fact is, most scientists will say that when shark bites occur, it's done on the basis of curiosity or defensiveness. That the issue is that but in both cases, they don't know what you are. You're a big thing where you don't belong, which is why I always say we're in the way, not on the menu. And if you had that as your basis when you went into the water, you'd stay closer to shore, you'd stay more in groups. I believe that the reason why shark nets look like they work, and I'm just speaking here as a total social scientist, but I believe the reason why shark nets look like they work is because people grouped together are unapproachable. It's more intimidating for sharks if a group of people are together. If someone's off in the distance or is lagging behind, that's not particularly intimidating. But if a group of people, which is what you have at beaches that are netted, have two flags and everybody swims in the middle, and that disturbance creates an intimidating situation for sharks where they don't know what we are, they don't know what's going on, and so they're not going to swim into it and find out. This is consistent with the same data that you see on ocean swims when they tagged bull sharks, and you saw that the bull sharks don't know what's going on. It's very loud, it's very noisy, and they tend to stay on the sides. But they're in the water, but they keep their distance. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that a similar condition is not going on when you swim between the flags and you swim in a large group, that it creates this intimidation factor that keeps sharks at a distance.
And that's not special about humans. That happens in the wild with all animals.
Absolutely, that's true. The difference with humans is that we're really big in the water. They're even bigger, but for an ocean creature, we're gigantic. And so when you put a bunch of us together, put 300 of us on a beach or in the water, it really does create something that is unique and unknown for sharks. And so it doesn't present, shark bites happen because they're opportunistic or curious. And it's not a good opportunity if there's 300 unknown things making a lot of noise somewhere in the water.
Just like with seals, it's the straggler that's going to get...
That's generally what you see, exactly. It's not smart to exactly go after a group of seals that is tightly formed and knit together.
Do you have a stance on ecotourism, conditioning these animals to associate us with food?
I've got a few thoughts. The first is that I'm not a big fan of a lot of kinds of ecotourism. So I'm quite skeptical of ecotourism, but for the science, I'm actually going to leave that to scientists. Whether chumming creates a relationship with the shark that keeps drawing it back, I think it's difficult to say. I've in my disclaimer, I've been on shark boats, shark scientific boats, where we were tagging great whites, and you sit there and chum all day long. I've chummed for 8 hours with sharks swimming around that you could see that never came anywhere near the boat. There's a lot of natural chum in the water. So to assume that the chum that you're putting in is creating a relationship, it might be the boat, but it certainly isn't the chum. Maybe it's the sound of the motor. It's more possible that it's one of those factors than it is chum. There's a ton of natural chum in the water, and you can sit there and chum all day and watch the sharks swim 50 feet away and never come anywhere near you.
What about the food reward of the bait at the end of the rope?
I think food reward is different. And I think that hopefully that's regulated, because the simple fact is that, food rewards are a problem, but it shouldn't be done anywhere. I'll also say I generally don't approve of cage diving. I don't think it's a good idea, not because it creates a system or because you end up with people who do food rewards when you're not supposed to, but because there's a lot of evidence that the ropes hurt the sharks. And the most likely scenario that you would have where you would have food reward would be when you're trying to get the tourists the good picture. So that's the second reason.
So wait, let me clarify that.
Yep.
Are you saying that the rope itself,
Yeah.
or that pulling the rope and making the shark hit the cage? It's
the rope that's around the cage and whatnot. I've seen a lot of damage to sharks.
I'm not familiar with a rope around a cage.
I'll pull up a picture or find a picture. Usually, or from bumping into the cage, or from any of a number of different things that are part of the gear that's used when it's dumped in the water. There sometimes is a rope that's fastened that's in the water that fastens the
Oh.
cage to the boat.
Got it.
That rope can hurt them. And your job is to pull it into the cage as much as possible. And so it avoids the cage and hits the rope, and we'll get a big line down the side of it. And the simple fact is that these industries are meant to, excite the public and to draw the shark in as close as possible. And by doing that, they create harms. They create harms by inadvertently or intentionally feeding the shark. They create harms by having the shark bump into the cage and get injured, or by by knocking into the rope and getting cut along the side. There are lots of different ways that it can injure sharks. If we were having a conversation about lions, and we said, now look, you just sit in the cage and I'm going to draw the lion in, and we saw, cuts and abrasions to the lions and getting hit in the head and having a gash in your face to the lion, we wouldn't do it. But because this is sharks, it continues to happen. And we'd say, oh, that's a good show because it came really close. But the simple fact is it damages the fish.
Well, there is a double standard even with scientists when it comes to sharks, because they use the fact that sharks live a violent life to justify invasive research methods.
I am not here to, I'm not in a position to comment on scientific research methods. I'm not a marine biologist, so I can't really say. But I do think that the critiques against cage diving should also include, can I parry to this? Because should also include the way in which
Say the whole thing.
One of the other critiques that I think is valid against shark cage diving is the fact that the funds don't go back to the communities. So you've got a situation where individual operators might be making quite a bit of money, but you don't see as much of an investment in local infrastructure and in local communities. So communities feel like someone's come in, is using the resources, the marine resources that are theirs, and profiting. So you've got, rich people who fly in, come to a thing, the shark is damaged, the environment might be damaged, they got great pictures, but it's leaving, but you've got poor people on the streets.
What if they're using the money for research, independently funded research?
Each individual case of research should be looked at on a case-by-case basis. There may be instances where it works, there might be instances where it doesn't. I think it's particularly challenging. I'm not a huge fan of shark cage diving. I've never done it, and I'll never do it.
Interesting. How difficult it is to re-educate people once the wrong idea is in their head?
So one of the key concepts of education is that whatever information gets in there first tends to sit there and tends to be much harder to get rid of. So if you tell someone something that's totally false, like swimming, don't swim for 30 minutes after you eat, or whatever it is, then getting that out of their head becomes much, much more difficult. And you have these myths that sort of reside culturally within groups, but it's that individual data, and it's that not just the information, but the time that it gets there that matters.
All I can think about is Sea Life's funding.
Well, there's funding is a tricky thing. I think you've got to look at the intentions behind the project, not just where all the funding comes from. Because if the fund, I work at the University of Sydney. They get funding from lots of different sources, and there are lots of different projects. The fact is that that they encourage me in my work to do unfiltered scientific research. When I did this project at Sea Life, I did unfiltered scientific research that was based on my standards, not theirs. And the only thing they were interested in was a little video afterwards that talked about my results. But the results showed that there was a 9% reduction in fear of sharks for having walked through the aquarium. Statistically significant relationship. That just walking through to perceive the sharks left them with a 9% reduction. So aquariums have, again, case-by-case basis. Aquariums can pose difficulties in a lot of ways. I think having captive animals comes with a very high responsibility. But the fact is also, in response to the point we were just making about cage diving, and how cage diving does have a public education aspect to it. I would say two things. One, that you can see the sharks from being on the boat and looking down. When a 3 meter or 4 meter white shark swims by, you're not missing much when it swims by your boat. That'll educate the public. And the second thing is that there are alternatives to doing it that way. And aquariums do provide a service that should be noted.
Yeah, but what's worse? A shark being enticed by bait or a shark that's in captivity?
I think, I don't think that there's an absolute answer to any of the questions. If the question is that we should have no captive animals in the sea, I think then, but we're going to allow fishermen to fish. And so now we're not looking at them, and they're out of sight, out of mind, and conservation laws are a product of attention, but we don't see the fish, then we are going to end up in a worse situation than if you have a few captive animals in an aquarium that are, that raise awareness to the public.
Out of sight, out of mind. You only protect what you care about.
That's right. And if you don't see it, you can't care about it.
And most likely, the majority of the population is not going to make the effort to go into the ocean to see animals in their natural habitat.
That's right. It's cost prohibitive for a lot of people. I mean, they work, and it's just a lot to even just get your kids in the car and go to the aquarium for the day without, going to the beach and, wanting to scuba dive.
Why does that apply to sharks but not orcas?
I think I will draw a line around mammals. I think in the treatment of mammals is fundamentally different. And I'm not supportive of having any mammal in captivity whatsoever.
And that was what you, viewing them from the top is what you told me to remind you about.
Yep.
Okay, so we got that. I wonder if we can squeeze in a nice little soundbite about leaving the gay rights movement was more dangerous than sharks. How did you say that earlier?
I wanted to, people ask me, how do you look at, people often mention that I've had a lot of careers. And I say, yes, I wanted to do something less dangerous than gay politics. So now I study shark attacks.
The shark world is a crazy one, though. People are heated.
It is a very passionate, much more passionate than anything else I've done within academia. LGBT politics is passionate as well, but I've never had a death threat in 15 years in doing it, and I've had death threats doing my work on shark bite prevention. So it's we're going to come find you, and here's my name in case you thought I was kidding. This all comes at a cost. I don't think you don't get into shark bite prevention because it's, for the money.
These are people who are convinced that sharks are bad and need to be killed. And who are you, you crazy
That's it.
liberal, trying to save these bad animals?
I've got blood on my hands for the work that I do, and I should be held responsible, and they're going to be the ones to do it. And, so at the same time that, you do any of this work, I try to keep in mind the families of the people who've lost someone, because I think the work that they do is truly courageous. And so when I see things like what happens in Western Australia, where the government goes and kills a shark, even though Sharon Burden suffered the loss that nobody can ever even imagine with the loss of Kyle, and then she had the bravery to go to the beach and say, Kyle loved the ocean, he wouldn't want this to happen. And then for the government to disrespect that and go out to kill the shark, I think is really when it shows you that this is a conversation about politics, not a conversation about beach safety. You had the same thing happen after George Wainwright died. His family came out and said, he wouldn't want anybody to go hunt a shark, and they went and hunt the shark. So, we're dealing with very sensitive issues that get a lot of people inflamed, and I think it's meant to discourage people from engaging. It's meant to scare people off. And politicians want to scare off questions that might be hard. Activists want to scare off people who might disagree with them. And so this is why I say there's an increased responsibility when you come to these issues to handle them carefully, but to never give up on the skepticism that you bring to it, because there's a lot of moving pieces.
Is there politics behind the lack of reporting of someone illegally baiting for sharks at the same time that someone is killed by a shark?
I think if a reporter had the information, they would generally use it. At least I'd like to think if it's newsworthy, it makes the news. I think, though, that there can be a lot of pressures that are brought to bear on the way any news story comes up. And
that happened here recently, didn't it?
It's an issue of knowing. I mean, there's in Tathra, it was unconfirmed. The same was true in the Lisa Mundi case, where people thought, where it was reported that there might have been, a big shipment of fish that had come in the harbor. Anywhere you swim, there was a boat somewhere nearby that was doing some fishing at some point recently. And so, if the question is, any of these swimming harbors are patrolled, there are boats, there are fishermen. The same is true when, got it, sorry. When, I really care about the environment. And the same is true in the Jesse Arbogast case in Florida that set off the Summer of the Shark. The fisherman cleaning his kill on the docks, on the pier, and washing fish blood into the water where little kids are playing. I mean, if you go into the water, there's bait fish. There are also fishermen nearby, and there are fish. And so I think at some point, at some point, that's part of the story of a dynamic ecosystem as well, is the fact that we're there and we're doing these things. And so, there is a great deal of risk.
I've noticed that Shark Summer, Summer of the Shark,
Mm-hmm.
Shark Attack Capital of the World, those names have been applied to more than one location at more than one time. Who do we blame for those names?
Editors. That's an editorial judgment. And, the amount of good writing I've seen where it's shark bite, shark bite, shark bite, shark attack capital, new shark attack capital across the header. There's a real untold story of the role of editors. Good reporters who do good reporting and are sensitive to the issues, to the families, to the sharks. And an editor comes in and changes a headline, and that's what people see, and that's the impression that they get.
What do you want to talk about?
I don't know.
I haven't brought up.
We've covered a lot.
Yeah. I can wrap it up too. I just don't.
I think we've. The one thing I would say is, this is actually important, is that everyone is trying to get a better outcome. At the same time that I give politicians a hard time, and I wish that scientists were louder sometimes, the fact is that the inflammation of this issue and of shark bite politics has gotten overheated. It's overcooked. If I'm getting death threats, if other people are getting death threats, if people want to go and harm, fishing companies that support the policy, the simple fact is that we need to care for each other when we deal with any political issue, especially hot button issues. And I've been most disappointed in the fact that this has gone to extremes on both sides. And I think this is a worthy conversation for public debate This is about public safety, and it is about shark conservation and the relationship between those two. And unfortunately, the extremes are dominating a lot of the debate, and it is scaring off people who want to engage in a meaningful conversation about an ocean that they love and about fish that they may or may not understand. And so this is a moment where everyone could stop and really try and engage and think about where this is going, because there's these terrible tragedies also present opportunities to really understand Mother Nature and the risks that we face when we go in the water. Beauty.
I love the quote, trying to govern ungovernable events prevents us from real shark bite prevention. I think we kind of covered that, though.
Well, the one thing I could say about that is that there are real things that we can do to lower risk that we're not doing while we're out trying to hunt the shark, or making it about the shark. And it's a sad story when there are real things you can do to reduce risk that you aren't doing because there's politics that's involved and you're chasing around a shark that you're never going to catch.
Have you investigated alternatives and come up with one that is your favorite?
You know, the problem is it really is case by case for each individual beach. You know, what Fishhook is doing with the exclusion net, I like the exclusion net. I don't like the reason it went in. The shark spotters did their job. They closed the beach. And someone independently went in the water and was bitten. And shark spotters were given a hard time. And now there's an exclusion net in the water. I mean, I like the idea of having an exclusion net that goes in the morning and out in the afternoon. It doesn't hurt any marine life. It's a low energy beach, so it works. The fact is, though, that it was put in after the shark spotters and the shark spotting program did exactly what they were supposed to do. It worked. The person didn't, and unfortunately it was bitten. And what it ends up looking like, though, is like the program doesn't work, so you put in the shark net. And I think that was a very unfortunate piece.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like I've seen a pattern in attacks in which somebody was actually advised not to go out at that time, and maybe went to probably one of the worst places they could have, around a seal colony, during low visibility, by themselves, etc. So if people are going to be people and do whatever the heck they want to do, no matter what someone tells them, then what good is education going to do? Do we have to be responsible for everyone making the right decision?
We don't have to be responsible for everyone making the right decision, but giving the information makes a huge difference. So if you can give the context, we're a people that live on context. Context gives us meaning. So if you understood the context that somebody had been warned and went in the water anyway, one of the things that was really powerful following the tragedy with Lloyd Skinner was that Lloyd Skinner had read an email that day that said, there's been a shark warning, there's been a warning about white sharks at Fishhook Beach. And he called his mom and said, I just read this warning about sharks at Fishhook Beach, but I'm going to go in. And this came out in the inquiry afterwards, and it made a big difference to the public, that the public understood that he knew the risks, and he knew that there was a risk that there could be sharks in the area, and he went in the water anyway. And this information really does make a difference to the way the public understands and gives meaning to the events.
Can shark spotters be implemented here?
It cannot, largely. There's too much glare, the water's too deep. One of the great advantages at Fishhook and at James Beach, Musenberg down there, is that you've got a long stretch of beach, so it's quite shallow. You can go out on Musenberg 100 meters and you're still in ankle deep water. This beach, you go out 100 meters, you're half a mile down. So the water is much deeper here. So unfortunately, it won't work in most places. They did have a very famous shark spotting tower at Manly in the 1930s to look down. And those do provide a little bit of relief because you can do that. I think the biggest thing that's helped Australia, as I said, is swim between the flags.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Skyler.